not my concern. I didn't need the coffee, likely my 5th cup at that point, but it did seem like the perfect excuse to avoid talking to my dad and stepmom about the newly launched presidential candidacy of Donald Trump. Yeah, they're never pouring you coffee when you want them to, I quipped in the most stilted diction imaginable. I caught sight of the server carrying a carafe nearing our table. I better use the bathroom before the food comes, I said, desperately hoping for a reprieve. Just then, the food arrived, even before the coffee. I was boxed in, nowhere else to hide. So yeah, what'd you think about the Republican debate last night? There's no way that clown Trump can make it through the primary season, right? I recoiled and braced for their reaction. My stepmom shrugged her shoulders and said, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure it all out. I felt dizzy and kind of disoriented. I'd vote for him, certainly over anyone the Democrats put up for office, my dad blurted out. What happened next, I don't really know for sure. I'm not sure how I looked on the outside, but I am quite sure how I felt on the inside. I felt the way that I've seen the condition vertigo depicted in movies, spinning and falling through a bottomless pit. One of my worst fears had been realized. My dad, the most important relationship in my life prior to meeting my wife, Michelle, had become a political radical. Perhaps some of you have been through a similar experience. You've seen someone behave in ways that are upsetting and outrageous. You've experienced family get-togethers that don't feel warm or connected the way that they used to. You've tried mapping out all the causal links between personal experience and political transformation. For me, though, I can say that what made that experience at Denny's in the spring of 2016 so horrifying is that I wouldn't be here today sharing this sermon, let alone being a member of the church for a dozen years without these two people who helped shape me into the person I am today. They are the folks who raised me to value honesty, integrity, and hard work, as well as the people who called out racism when they saw it, taught me to view sexual orientation as a private matter and no one else's damn business, and said the government has no right telling people whether or not to have an abortion. I've been totally and completely betrayed by the people who gave me the value structure that served me so well over the years. At this point in the sermon, I'm tempted to catalog and share all the ways that these two individuals transformed over time from honorable conservatives to proto-fascist tyrants. But thanks to decades of therapy, I'll spare everyone the agony of hearing such a diatribe. I want to instead focus on the community aspects of the situation. Yes, the community aspects. By exploring the subject, I want to make clear that I don't let my dad and stepmom off the hook. They've made their choices, and I'm very disappointed with what they've done. But I also believe that about 50% of people's behavior comes from the cues they observe in the environment. What people see and experience around them informs their decision-making. Said bluntly, I think my parents could have used a community like neighborhood church. However, said even more bluntly, there's no way in hell, I guess I can say that from here, that neighborhood church would have had them. In order to understand why, let me share with you my first year as a guest and member of the church. The year was 2007. After the chaos of George W. Bush's second term, I changed my party affiliation from Republican to Independent, though I still lean right on many issues. I also worked and continue to work in the business world. To be honest, it was hard to sit through many of the sermons. They were often anti-Republican and anti-business. Even on culture issues, the tone was distasteful to me, even when I agreed with the speaker's viewpoint. For example, when the California State Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage, our senior minister lifted his arms and shouted, "We won!" I thought to myself, that statement sounds vindictive rather than thoughtful or reflective. It seemed I had found myself in a religious community that was anti-Republican, anti-business, and openly cheered defeating the other side. For these reasons, neighborhood church didn't feel open and welcoming. It felt instead like a group of nice people who disagreed with me on several core issues. Obviously, I decided to stick with it and work through my discomfort. And in order to work through this discomfort, I was forced to reconcile what many American conservatives see as the hypocrisy of the American left and progressive movement, a group that purports to embrace diversity and welcome differences, yet, when it comes down to it, this movement often seems to actually reflect ideological purity. I'm not looking for a fight when I make this comment. Given what's occurred in American politics in the last few years, I can't believe I ever voted for anything that would ultimately lead to the Trump movement. Now, I'm thinking about the struggles we will have as a nation after the Trump fever breaks, and I wonder how the future versions of my dad and stepmom will determine their political allegiances. In times of social change, I often look to thought leaders for wisdom. One of these is Peter Block, author of the book, Community, the Structure of Belonging. I'm sure many of you know his work. I was lucky enough to have met and worked with Peter during my grad school program at Pepperdine. He's truly an insightful soul. What inspires me so much about Block's work is his clarity about community and the common good. He sees through so much of the hollow rhetoric that's often bandied about. Here's one of my favorite passages from the book, Community, the Structure of Belonging. The overriding characteristic of the stuck community is the decision to broadcast all the reasons we have to be afraid. This is a kind of advertising that exploits the fear we have of violence, of the urban core, of terrorism, of African Americans and other ethnic groups, of immigrants, or those who are poor or undereducated, of other religions and of other countries. It seems like the lead story of every local newscast is about crime and human suffering. And if our city had known that day, then we hear how somewhere else in the world someone was murdered, bombed, killed in an accident, or abducted from what was once thought to be a safe place. What we are hearing is the marketing of fear. Close quote. Now, the topics enumerated in the above passage make sense to most or all of us as exaggerations meant to distract attention and consolidate certain groups' power. However, I ask you to think about my experiences when first joining the church. It felt a lot like the passage above, just with different groups and actors involved. I heard the marketing of fear around business, conservative groups, and often traditional religious institutions. And I ask you to think how someone in a business career, from a conservative background, or from a traditional religious organization might react. Would they be open to hearing or learning more? But Peter Block doesn't stop there. He goes on to talk about community restoration. He says, and I quote, "Restoration comes from the choice to value possibility and relatedness over problems, self-interest, and the rest of the stuck community's agenda. It hinges on the accountability chosen by citizens and their willingness to connect with each other around promises they make to each other. Restoration is by the kinds of conversations we initiate with each other. These conversations are the leverage point for an alternative future. The core question that underlies each conversation is, what can we create together? Shifting the context from retribution to restoration will occur through language that moves in the following directions: from problems to possibility, from fear and fault to gifts, generosity, and abundance, from law and oversight to social fabric and chosen accountability, from corporation and systems to associational life, and from leaders to citizens." End quote. So at this point, I've got very little in common with my dad and stepmom. For a whole variety of reasons, we don't connect and interact the way that we used to. But I believe strongly that they could have been swayed from going down the dark and self-destructive path that they've chosen. They introduced me to personal growth and therapy. They taught me about many of the social justice topics that this church holds dear. They transferred many life skills to me that allow me to discern truth from falsehood. They could be, no, should be, sitting in this sanctuary right now, bringing the best of their life experiences to our collective effort. But would this church have them? Right now, given their recent choices, I doubt it. I doubt I would welcome them, if I'm honest. But how about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, before the Republican Party was so extreme? Would this community have welcomed self-employed pro-business conservatives who considered themselves socially libertarian? We will never ultimately know. But I have my concerns and doubts. In order to gain the benefits from this community, they would have had to endure hours of fear marketing about the evils of their work, political party, and life choices. Now, of course, I'm not naive about the reality of our current polity. I know that our country's political polarization has made compromise and collaboration nearly impossible. It's probably too late to influence those who have staked their future on crushing the opposition. But again, I'm thinking of the future, of the world in which my daughter will live. Will she see America as comprised of two camps, one virtuous and one evil? Will she experience no-go zones in her own country? If we continue traveling down our current road, I might just say yes. We seem caught in an endless cycle of disagreement and retribution. In order to avoid this dark outcome, I want to challenge what may be one of your most closely held values of neighborhood church: agreement. I imagine that you agree with many or most of the congregants here, and I'm sure that feels pretty good. But what's the cost of this arrangement? What's the cost of building an ideological wall around this community of people? Perhaps the cost is that the rest of the community, and indeed the world, loses out on what we might have to say, and perhaps we lose out on what they have to share. Maybe we're right, so to speak, but are we building a better society? And speaking of building, what are we building and creating as a community? I honestly couldn't tell you. This might be because I've been checked out of the church for most of the last few years. It might also be because in my experience, this community often defines itself by what it is not. It's not traditional, not mainstream, etc. Yet it might also be because this community often prides itself on narrow identity politics in ways that have fragmented people, making any sort of collective effort difficult. I don't know for sure, but I would like to find out, and I would like to feel a part of a community that is generative, creative, and inclusive. But before I go too far down that road, I'd like to tell you some of the qualities and preferences of my dad and stepmom, many of which are alive and well today. They love their children and grandchildren. They love the outdoors. They love dogs. They love a vibrant economy. They love the blues, at least my dad does. They love Woody Allen movies. When I remember all this and reflect on it, they strike me as two people I'd really like to build something with. They sound like interesting people, but can I value possibility and relatedness over differences and self-interest? I'm trying. I really am. Are you trying? Really? I know that all of you have that relative or coworker or Facebook friend whose comments make you cringe. What have you done to explore possibility and identify relatedness with them? What have you done to find a common cause in a way that places you both in the role of activated, concerned citizens? Yet before any of this can happen, I want to challenge you directly to consider the following question. Can I be in community with people I don't agree with? It sounds so obvious, basic, and fundamental. I would imagine most of you reflexively answer yes to this question. But can you actually do it? I'm thinking many of you are saying some version of the following statement in your head. I'm not the one supporting this dangerous movement. Ask them to be a little more tolerant of dissent. If you're saying this to yourself, here's my response. I have one statement to make and one question to ask. My statement is, you're right. And my question is, do you want to be effective? My life experience has taught me that being right does not always lead to being effective. And one thing I know about my dad and stepmom, and I believe a major contributing factor to their ultimate radicalization, is that they feel like unwanted outsiders. They've never really felt a part of anything, shunned by most groups they encounter. Because of their views on abortion and same-sex marriage, they're pro-choice and uninterested in people's sexual orientation. They're not really accepted by most conservative communities. So, what might have happened if they'd been embraced or at least included because of their differences? What if a community such as this one had said to them, we don't agree with many of your political positions, but your opinions are welcome here. We'd like to understand you more fully, and we'd like to help explain our worldview. Perhaps there's more overlap than we both expect. This experience might have led to an outcome in which no one was right, but it might actually have been effective. Effective at pointing out possibilities and relatedness, and maybe most important, effective at diminishing the conditions that led to radicalization. We all know this to be true, but we rarely do it. Stephen Covey said that common sense is not always common practice. And Thich Nhat Hanh said that it is easy to be mindful. It is difficult to remember to be mindful. To all of you, I say, let's practice common sense and be mindful. No matter how tempted we are to defend our arguments or claim moral and intellectual superiority, the strength of our shared communities and indeed American democracy may depend on it. Yet agreement is not enough. We need action. I have an assignment for you. It has two parts, one of which is optional. The first part, which I'd like you all to do, is find that relative, coworker, or Facebook friend who makes comments that unnerve you. Lean in to this relationship. Ask questions about their life. What are their interests? What activities do their children enjoy? What was the location of their last vacation? And if you want to complete the full assignment and be in Peter Block's good graces, invite this other person to build or create something with you. If this person is a relative, invite them to plan an extended family outing. If this person is a coworker, see if they might be open to organizing a social activity. If this person is a Facebook friend, sorry, Facebook doesn't lend itself to intimacy. But maybe you can send this person a private message that explains your decision to remain positive on social media and encourage them to do the same. Growing up in the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era of American politics, I often thought that I was born too late. The Vietnam and Watergate issues were so dramatic and intense, essentially forcing people to take sides and confront moral dilemmas. In contrast, politics during much of my childhood was often characterized by arguments over the size of tax cuts and the number of military base closures. Well, I finally got my childhood wish. The country has found itself at an intellectual, moral, and spiritual crossroads. And we are here to assume the mantle of leadership that this country requires. In America, we've created a culture in which one person's success seems to only come at another person's failure. We've been conditioned to believe that voters have two choices: out of control business greed or reckless government waste. We're told to pick our poison. I reject this false choice. I reject the cynical view of the situation. I know that business owners, academics, oil and gas executives, and environmental activists share much in common, much more than what normally pulls them apart. As much as I love this message and all its implications, I still feel a strong drive to assign blame and seek retribution. I oftentimes wake up at 3 a.m. saying to myself, if only the NRA and the Koch brothers and the Dick Cheney war machine hadn't destroyed this country's sense of common good, then maybe we'd be in a better place right now. Just as my conservative friends experience their own version of the same dream, except they're blaming Greenpeace and MSNBC and the Clinton family. But none of this, on either side, does much to move us forward. We need humanism, and we need it now. Not humanism for some, humanism for all. If you're offended by someone's point of view, then engage with it. Bring it out into the sunlight, which is the world's greatest disinfectant. Don't expect extreme views to get better underground or in isolation. One of my favorite authors, Robert Quinn, asked the question, what if we held ourselves to the same standard that we expect of our leaders? I know that I'd be a much better person if I held myself to this standard, and I'm sure you would too. Let's live into this ideal. Let's remember the first UU principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Let's remember what binds us together. Let's remember that we're stronger together than we are apart. Let's reframe our understanding of community. Community is not about agreement. Community is about engagement.